Hi everyone. Today we are going to discuss about two important topics in pediatric surgery, and these topics also included in the GIT. That is, one is intussusception, the other one is the Meckel's diverticulum. Coming to intussusception, the definition of intussusception is that it is telescoping or invagination of one portion, that is one segment of the bowel, into the adjacent segment. Mostly this telescoping or invagination, in most of the cases, it is from proximal bowel to the distal bowel. So again, the definition, it is telescoping or invagination of one portion of the bowel into the adjacent segment. In most of the cases, it is the proximal bowel that telescopes into the distal bowel. See, in this picture, you can see first the mesentery goes. Here the mesentery, which first telescopes or invaginates from the proximal end to the distal end. This is the proximal lobe, which is telescoping into the distal bowel lobe. This is the cross section. The peak incidence of this intussusception is between 5 and 10 months weaning period of the child. It is during more common during the weaning period. What is this weaning period? Weaning period is that when the baby completes taking the breast milk, and after that it is around like 6 months of the age. It's more common in females. And this intussusception is the commonest cause of intestinal obstruction in children of age 6 to 18 months. It is the commonest cause of intussusception. What is the pathogenesis of this intussusception? Why it is common during the weaning period? Because during the weaning period, there will be the loss of passively acquired maternal immunity, that is maternal antibodies, there will be loss, and there is change in the diet, shifting from the mother's milk to the normal diet. So change in the diet, and also the common viral pathogens like the infant may be acquired to the respiratory infections or gastroenteritis, like the viral pathogens. All these changes like loss of passively acquired maternal immunity, change in the diet, and common viral pathogens, all this will cause the hyperplasia in the Peyer's patches in the terminal ileum. This is the initiating event. What is this Peyer's patches and where they're located? These Peyer's patches are nothing but the lymphoid follicles which are present in the submucosal layer of the terminal ileum. During the weaning period, if the child is infected or acquired any infection, and if this leads to the inflammation of this Peyer's patches, this is the initiating event for the intussusception. Coming to the etiology part, 90% of the intussusception cases, the etiology is idiopathic, that is, it is unknown. And it is mostly associated with upper respiratory tract infection or gastritis. However, in case of adults, when the intussusception is present in the adults, it is almost associated with pathological lead point. That is, one of the pathological entity is present in case of adult cases. However, in case of children, it is mostly idiopathic. So what are these pathological lead points? Examples are polyps, jejunal polyps, which you will see in Pitt-Jeghers syndrome, and submucosal lipomas, Meckel's diverticulum, which we will be discussing in the next slides, and HSP, Henoch-Schönlein purpura, or appendix. In case of HSP, there will be, you know that HSP is an immunological condition which is associated with rash and also hematomas. Hematomas in the bowels, hematoma in the intestine will form the pathological lead point in case of HSP. So again, the etiology you can classify as like in children and in adults. In children, spontaneously, this is the mostly 90% of these cases is idiopathic or spontaneous without any leading point. This is due to the inflammation or the hypertrophy of the Peyer's patches. And the other leading points, coming to the leading points in children like Meckel's diverticulum, polyp, purpura, HSP, intravenous cyst, ectopic pancreas. Whereas in case of adults, the spontaneous are less common compared to the leading point. Leading point are more in case of adults like tumors, polyps, ulcers, and foreign bodies also sometimes. Coming to the pathology of this intussusception. Intussusception, it contains like three parts. One is intussusceptum, that is the inner tube is intussusceptum, or the one which is entering is the intussusceptum, whereas the returning or the middle tube, and the third part is the sheath or the outer tube which receives the intussusceptum, that is intussuscipiens. The one which receives is the intussuscipiens, which is the sheath or the outer tube. So in this diagram, the entering one or the innermost one is the intussusceptum, whereas the one which is receiving the one is the intussuscipiens, and the one which advances inside, advances is the apex. Apex is the region which advances, and the one which is connecting between the apex and intussusceptum is the neck. So apex is the part which advances, and the whole mass is the intussusception, whereas neck is the junction of entering layer with the mass. So if there is a lead point like Meckel's diverticulum or polyp, so what happens? How the intussusception occurs? On the basis of the direction of peristalsis, mostly it is from the proximal to the distal end. So this lead point, it gets inside. That is this is the one which is going inside. That is known as intussusceptum. And the one which is receiving, that is the distal one or the outside one, is the intussuscipiens. So this is the proximal ball and this is the distal one. The one which is advancing is the apex, and the one which is connecting the advancing apex and the mass is the neck. So degree of ischemia. Once the bowel invaginates or telescopes into the lumen of the other bowel, depending upon the tightness of the invaginations, the ischemia depends. It is usually greatest as it passes through the ileocecal valve. In the coming slides, we will be discussing about the different types of intussusception. In children, commonly the ileocolic intussusception is the commonest one. That is, ileum is entering into the cecum part. There, due to the ileocecal wall, there will be tightness of the invagination. So the degree of ischemia will be more at that point. So in this slide, oh, come on. Anatomical types, it is like site and extent of invagination. In children, it is mostly the ileocolic part. That is ileum invaginating into the cecum and the ascending column. See, this is the ileum, small intestine, terminal part, and appendix, cecum. And this is the large intestine. In this, what happens? The peristalsis, as the peristalsis advances, this small intestine part, ileum, it goes into the colon. That is, into the colon is the one which is receiving the ileum. So it is the colon will become the intussuscipiens, whereas the ileum, it forms the intussusceptum. In adults, the other type like colocolic, jejuncolic, these are the common types in case of adults. This intussusception can be single, only single one, or multiple. This multiple are very rare. It is seen in some of the syndromes like trichophagia, where the adults are keeping on eating the hair. They forms the multiple intussusceptions. This is very rare one. So there is also other types. It is also divided into other types like antegrade and also retrograde. Antegrade, it is most common. Antegrade is nothing but the one which is entering from proximal to distal, whereas retrograde, or the rare one, it is entering in the reverse direction. That is, distal one is entering into the proximal. For example, in jejunogastric, in gastrojejunectomy. So this is the example of the retrograde one, in which the stomach is entering into the esophagus. Stomach is the distal part of the bowel which is entering into the esophagus. In case of antegrade, it is like proximal one which is entering into the distal one, whereas in case of retrograde, it is the distal one that is entering into the proximal one. Okay, coming to the clinical features, the most important clinical feature is the pain, that is colicky abdominal pain, which accounts for 75%. And initially it is colicky pain and it gradually becomes severe and persistent. And the other important clinical feature is red currant jelly stool. That is, as the apex and inner tubes advances, and because of the tightness of the invagination, there will be compromised blood supply that leads to gangrene. Because of ischemia, the apex sloughs and bleeds, and this mixes with the mucus to produce the classic red currant jelly stools that is passed per annum. Okay, this red color jelly stools are classical feature of the intussusception. However, this is not found in all the cases. These red currant jelly stools are common in children but not in adults. So what about recurrence in case of, so the important clinical features is one is pain, the other one is the red current stools. Pain, it is colicky pain which is initially colicky, then it becomes severe and persistent. The other one is red current jelly stools, which is also classically seen in case of infant intussusception. The other one is recurrence. When it gets reduced, when the intussusception gets reduced, the child will automatically will become asymptomatic. So in between the episodes, when there is intussusception, the child will be symptomatic, and between the intussusception episodes, the child will be asymptomatic. So the mother often complains like बच्चे रोते हैं और बच्चे सोते हैं, means the child will be crying and after time that the child will be sleeping. So once the episodes ends or once the episodes last, the child will sleep peacefully. So clinically, this intussusception child will present like the child will be screaming a lot because of the pain and holding the legs upwards, and once the pain subsides or when the intussusception gets reduced on itself, the child will be asymptomatic and he will go to sleep. Coming to the abdominal examination, what are the findings you will see in the abdominal examination? This abdominal examination should be conducted when the child is sleeping, that is in between the episodes, not during when the child is screaming. So in between the episodes, you have to conduct this abdominal examination on which you will be able to palpate a mass. This palpable mass you can see in 85% of the cases. The shape of the mass will be like sausage shape and smooth border, and it is firm in consistency. This mass does not move with respiration because it's nowhere connected with the diaphragm. So this does not move with respiration, and it is mobile in all direction. The mass is mobile in all direction, and once you are palpating, it contracts. That means that once you are palpating, the mass will disappears, and once if you are lifting the fingers, it will again appears. So the mass appears and disappears on palpation, and also it is resonant on percussion. So in this picture, you will be able to see this sausage shaped mass, which is smooth border, that is the border is well defined and it is firm in consistency. It does not move with respiration and it is mobile in all directions, and it appears and disappears with the palpating fingers, and it is resonant on percussion. So there is one sign that you will be eliciting in case of intussusception is sign of dance. That is, as the mass is shifted to the upper quadrant, it is most common in the right side because ileocolic is the most common one. So if there is ileocolic intussusception, the intussusception will be shifted to the upper or middle quadrant of the abdomen in the right side, and the right lower quadrant, that is right iliac fossa, will be empty. That is right iliac fossa is empty, and this is dance sign, which is the characteristic of intussusception. As the intussusception progresses, the child will be having symptoms like vomitings also, and there will be distension, abdominal distension, and intestinal obstructions, and the peristalsis like the stepladder peristalsis. And if it is not treated, then it may land up with the gangrene and perforation, which leads to peritonitis, generalized peritonitis. Meanwhile, the patient will be having the systemic symptoms like dehydration, confusion, lethargy. All these are associated with this intestinal obstruction. So apart from the abdominal examination, you have to also do perrectal examination, distal examination of the rectum. What are the findings on perrectal examination? Your glove will be stained with blood, that is blood stained stools. And occasionally intussusception can be seen per annulally, that is the apex or the intussusception mass we can see per annulally. So this is the picture. See, in this picture, that's the ileum is telescoping inside the ascending colon, and as there is a ileocecal valve, it is obstructing it initially because of the as the apex sloughs off. Because of compromised blood supply, it will cause bleeding. When this blood mixes with the mucus, it forms the red currant jelly stools. The blood vessels become trapped between these layers. There will be edema, strangulation, gangrene, and death also in the late cases. So how do you investigate? What are the investigations for this intussusception? Whenever there is an suspicion of intestinal obstruction, the first basic investigation to order is X-ray, plain X-ray. In case of intussusception with intestinal obstruction, you will see multiple air fluid levels. See, all these loops are with multiple air fluid levels. However, in case of ileocolic intussusception, there will be absent colonic gas. In this picture, you can see the small bowel is distended, or the small bowel is showing this air fluid levels. However, there is no air in the large bowel. So the other investigation is ultrasound. In case of ultrasound, you will see different signs: target sign, pseudo kidney sign, bull eye sign. Okay, all this target sign, pseudo kidney sign, bull sign, the only pathology behind that is one tube is passing into the other tube, that is telescoping of the proximal bowel into the distal bowel, which on cross section or on cut section you will be seeing the coral shaped or the target sign. See, this is the normal right kidney and this is the intussusception. This hyperechoic tissue and this is the hypoechoic one, which is like we are seeing it as a pseudo kidney sign. It's not a true kidney, so it is like intussusception. On ultrasound, the sign, one of the sign is pseudo kidney sign. This is the target sign or the bull's eye sign. What is target sign? Here the hyperechoic compressed loop of bowel telescoping within. This is the one which is entering one, and this is the outside sheath, the hypoechoic edematous. This is the hyperechoic. This is the bull's sign or target sign. See, this is the other picture, target sign or Downett sign. See, don't get confused with this Downett sign and the other one which is in congenital pyloric stenosis. In radiology, these signs may overlap. The main, you have to know why these signs are appearing. In case of congenital pyloric stenosis also, because of the hypertrophy of the circular muscles and the compromised lumen, it is like two lumens, like the ring shape is appearing. Here also, as the two bowel loops, one proximal one is telescoping into the distal one, it is appearing as the Downett, the ring shaped one, alternating hypo and hyperechoic bands. See, in case of Doppler, you know, Doppler is nothing but ultrasound plus vascular study. So ultrasound, you are seeing the Downett sign, and Doppler to study the vascularity, to check the blood supply of the bowel, we will be using the Doppler one, whether the bowel is viable or not. Coming to the other investigation, that is barium enema. In case of barium enema, you will find the classical claw sign or coil spring sign or pincer end. What is this pincer end? It is like in pediatrics, you will feel like pincer grasps. So that is the pincer one, claw sign or coil spring sign. This is characteristic of the ileocolic intussusception. So in case of barium enema with a patient of ileocolic intussusception, you will be seeing this claw sign or coil spring sign or pincer end. See, this is the barium enema, the contrast. You are able to appreciate the contrast, right? This is all the contrast. Here, this is the transverse colon and descending colon, sigmoid one. Here, it is the region of the ascending colon, cecum, ileum. Here, it is like the claw sign, indicating that it is an ileocolic intussusception. So in case of CT scan also, you will find the target sign, which is the pathognomic. CT scan, the advantage of CT scan is like it helps to find out the lead point. As we had discussed, the lead points, like pathological lead points are common in adults. So to know what is the lead point, the CT scan will be helpful. However, very rarely this intussusception has been noted on CT scan in asymptomatic adults also. So even if the radiologist has commented that intussusception is present, you have to decide on the basis of the clinical features. Don't go blindly with the radiological reports, because rarely intussusception has been noted on CT scanning in asymptomatic adults, right? See, this is the target sign. This like alternating hypo and hyperechoic because of one bowel is telescoping into the other bowel. So coming to the differential diagnosis of intussusception, the differential diagnoses are like acute gastroenteritis, where the pain and bleeding per annum, and also fever, diarrhea. Because with the diarrhea, you can differentiate with the acute gastroenteritis. Similarly, with purpura, with the intestinal symptoms, carcinoma, colon, mesenteric mass, all these are the differential diagnoses for the intussusception. How do you treat the case of intussusception? For any intestinal obstruction, not only intussusception or Meckel's diverticulum, adhesions, alveolus, or anything, the one in surgery, the most important treatment or the first line of treatment in case of intussusception, in case of intestinal obstruction is first is to optimize the patient or to resuscitate the patient. That is, initially when you are suspecting intestinal obstruction in case of any patient, the first thing is like NPO, that is nil per mouth, nil orally. Don't you have to advise not to take anything by mouth. Next is Ryle's tube aspiration. You have to insert the nasogastric tube. Next, you have to optimize with the help of IV fluids, and also you have to correct the hydration and antibiotics, IV antibiotics. This is the initial management. That is, one, you have to stabilize the patient or you have to resuscitate, optimize the patient. Once you have done the adequate optimization, then you have to decide whether to operate the patient or to do non-operative measures. So in case of non-operative management, when to do non-operative management? That is conservative management, and in whom, in which patients you have to do non-operative management, and what are the techniques of non-operative management. In case of early stage presentation, that is, if the child presents to you within 24 hours of the clinical symptoms, that is early stage presentation. In case of this presentation, early presentation, you have to go for non-operative management. This non-operative management is done with the help of reduction. The reduction is by two techniques, like one is hydrostatic enema, the other one is pneumatic enema. Hydrostatic enema is by with the help of warm saline or contrast like barium, and pneumatic enema is with the help of air. Okay. In case of non-operative management or conservative management, if the patient present to you within 24 hours of the clinical symptoms, then you can try this reduction method. This reduction can be done with the help of hydrostatic enema, hydrostatic technique, or pneumatic enema technique. In case of pneumatic enema, you will use air, whereas in case of hydrostatic technique, you will use warm saline or contrast like barium. How do you do this one? That is, you infuse this barium or saline through a catheter. Commonly we do with Foley's catheter. We will insert the Foley's catheter into the rectum and you will infuse this. So in this picture you can see the catheter is inserted into the rectum, and this you can connect the normal saline, or sometimes linger lactate can be also used, and the pressure has to be maintained around like 100 mm of mercury. And once you are inserting it, you will be able to appreciate that there will be this reduction of the intussusception. So how do you say that the intussusception is reduced completely? Once you are pushing this saline or barium and the intussusception is complete, clinically we can say when the child will if the child passes large quantity of air and feces. As soon as once the reduction is complete, or as soon as once the hydrostatic pressure or enema is completed, the child will be passing large quantity of air and feces, indicating that the intussusception is reduced. And also you can appreciate that the distension, abdominal distension, which was present earlier, will be reduced, and there will be recovery, and the child stops crying. Similarly, the palpable abdominal mass, the sausage-shaped mass, will be disappears. These are the findings you will be felt clinically once the intussusception is reduced. What are the findings you will see under fluoroscopy or under using ultrasound? If you are using ultrasound or fluoroscopy to assess whether the intussusception is completely reduced or not, in such case the air or contrast will enter into the proximal bowel freely. As you are entering from below, this air or contrast will be entering into the proximal bowel freely, which you can be appreciate with the help of ultrasound or fluoroscopy. Coming to the complication of this reduction technique is rarely you can see the perforation. However, 70% of cases will be responding to this non-operative method, that is reduction method, with the help of hydrostatic or pneumatic enema method. 70% of the cases will be responding to this non-operative method, and selection of patient is also important. You have to select the cases which are early presented to you. This reduction method or non-operative method is contraindicated in case of complete obstruction, perforation, and peritonitis. Now, this is about non-operative method. What about the indications for surgery? When are you going to plan for surgery? If the patient present to you late, that is more than 44 hours, and if there are features of perforation, strangulation, peritonitis, and the intussusception is recurrent. In first case, if you had tried non-operative method and it again appears, then you can plan for surgery. And also in case of adults, why in adults? Because in case of adults there's a chance of pathological lead point is more, so better to go for surgery. This is are the indications for surgery. Coming to the surgery, it is like CAPS method or Cope's method, that is laparotomy. You will be giving right side incision, like you are opening the right side of abdomen, and you will be appreciating the mass intussusception. Then the important thing is you have to be very gentle in this procedure. In case of any surgery also, you have to be very gentle, but coming to the intussusception, you should be very gentle while milking out or while squeezing out or pushing out the compromised or compressing the most distal part of intussusception towards its origin. Here the important one is that you have to gently compress the distal part of intussusception, and you should not pull the bowel lobe. Make sure that you should not pull it. You have to gently milking out. You have to milk it out or squeeze out the intussusception, but you should not pull it out. Okay. While doing this procedure, the last part of the reduction will be difficult. After the intussusception is reduced, the important thing is you have to assess the bowel, whether it is viable or not. Now, how do you assess the bowel, whether it is bowel or viable or not? See, these are the differences between a viable bowel and a non-viable bowel intraoperatively. That is during the surgery. Intraoperatively, you have to assess for circulation. If it is dark color, initially when the intussusception is reduced, the bowel will be dark color and it will become lighter, and you will be able to appreciate the pulsation in the mesenteric arteries. That is indicating that the bowel is viable. And similarly, the general appearance of the bowel will be shiny and the musculature will be firm, and you can also see the peristalsis. All these are the features of the viable intestine. Like peristalsis can be appreciated, and musculature on palpating it will be firm in consistency, rubbery firm, and on general appearance it will be shiny. And similarly you will be able to see the pulsations, the peristalsis, and this pulsation is in the mesenteric vessels. Mesentery you can see the pulsations, and gradually the dark color of the bowel will becomes lighter. So all these features are the indicates that the bowel is viable. And coming to the non-viable part, if the bowel is non-viable, how to appreciate that or how to identify that? This dark color will remain dark only. It will not change into light color, and you will not see any pulsations in the mesentery part. And on looking also, the general appearance will be dull and lusterless, whereas the musculature will be thin, flabby, friable, and you will not see peristalsis. This all indicates that the bowel is non-viable. So, what to do if a bowel is viable and if a bowel is non-viable? If the bowel is viable, well and good, that you will pack it with or gently mop it with the warm packs, and you will close the abdomen. If it is non-viable, then you have to plan for resection and anastomosis. So, coming to the treatment of intussusception, one is non-operative method, that is reduction with the help of hydrostatic or pneumatic enemas. The second one is surgery. In surgery also, one is after opening the abdomen, you have to try to reduce the intussusception. Once it is reduced and it is the bowel is viable, then you can close. If it is not viable, or if you are identifying any pathological lead point, in such case you have to plan for resection, that is cutting and doing the primary anastomosis, suturing again. In most of the cases, as we had already discussed that ileocolic intussusception is the common, and you will be able to see appendix in that area. So appendicectomy should be done after reduction of the intussusception. In all the surgeries, this is we can do in the open method also in case of laparoscopic approach. See, this is the laparoscopic view. This one is the into the proximal bowel, or the distended one, the proximal obstructed one, which is going into the distal loop. See, this mesentery is the one which goes inside. Next, this proximal bowel loop enters. This is the telescoping view. See, this is the intussusceptum, which one is going inside, and the one which is receiving is the intussuscipiens. So what are the recurrence rates with these various techniques of treatment? With a hydrostatic reduction, the recurrence rate is very less, that is 10%. When if it is with the open manual reduction, it is 2%. The same thing with the laparoscopic one also. And if you done the resection anastomosis, then the recurrence rate is very less, because you are removing the pathological lead point. Okay, this is about the intussusception. So intussusception is it is the commonest cause of intestinal obstruction in the age group of 6 to 18 months because of the weaning age. The other most common one is the ileocolic. And coming to the investigation part, you will go with x-rays, ultrasound, where you can see the target sign, downnet sign, pseudo kidney sign. And then treatment, mostly non-operative method depending upon the clinical condition of the patient. And in coming to the surgery, it is manual reduction. And if there is any lead point, or if the bowel is gangrenous, in such cases you have to go for resection anastomosis. Okay. Next, we will be entering into the second topic of the day, that is Meckel's diverticulum. This is also a very interesting one, that is Meckel's diverticulum. See, Meckel's diverticulum, this is the most common congenital anomaly of small intestine, most common congenital anomaly, and this is the true diverticulum. Here, what is meant by this true diverticulum and false diverticulum? True diverticulum is the one which is containing all the layers of intestine, that is mucosa, submucosa, muscle, and serosa, and it has independent blood supply. Whereas false diverticulum is the one which is containing only some of the layers, and the blood supply is also from, it is having the same blood supply from the intestine. This Meckel's diverticulum is 2% common. Its prevalence rate is 2%. Okay, see in this picture you can see the Meckel's diverticulum, the true congenital diverticulum, the most common congenital anomaly of the small intestine. So, coming to the development part of Meckel's diverticulum, normally during the 8th week of gestation, the vitelline duct or the omphallomesenteric duct, it undergoes obliteration. During 8th week of gestation, this omphallomesenteric duct normally gets obliterated. If there is failure to obliterate this duct, then it will result in some of the congenital anomalies. Of these anomalies, the Meckel's diverticulum is the common one. So this is the picture. See, yolk sac is 3-week embryo and this is the 4-week embryo. Here there is an omphallomesenteric duct and this is the umbilical cord. In future it will be becoming the umbilicus. This omphallomesenteric duct normally gets obliterated by 8th week. Failure to obliterate will leads to many of the congenital anomalies, of which Meckel's diverticulum is the common one. These are the other vitelline duct abnormalities. One is vitelline fistula. Vitelline fistula, that is, this is the small intestine, midgut, connecting with the umbilicus fistula. Sometimes there will be cyst formation. Sometimes only the cord or band. And this is the Meckel's diverticulum, which is the most common anomaly of the vitelline duct anomalies. And sometimes there will be Meckel's diverticulum and also some cord or band, and in these cases there is a chances of volvulus. So Meckel's diverticulum, it is a persistent remnant of vitalointestinal duct or omphallomesenteric duct. This is normally arising from the terminal ileum, that is 2 feet or 60 centimeters from the ileocecal wall, and mostly it is 2 inch in length, that is 5 centimeters in length. It is 2 inch in length and 2 feet from ileocecal wall. And it arises from the anti-mesenteric border of ileum. You all know, no? The ileum, if it is attached to the mesentery and it has an anti-mesenteric part. So it is arises mostly from at a distance of 2 feet from the ileocecal wall, that is terminal ileum, from the anti-mesenteric border. So we had already discussed about this true diverticulum or false diverticulum or pseudo diverticulum. True diverticulum is the one which is containing all the layers of the bowel and with independent blood supply, whereas pseudo diverticulum will have only the few layers, and this pseudo diverticulum is common with colon. Colonic diverticulars are mostly pseudo diverticulars. Okay. As Meckel's diverticulum is a congenital anomaly, it is also associated with other anomalies like esophageal atresia, exomphalmus, umbilical hernias, infantile umbilical hernias, anorectal malformations. And it is also sometimes connected or communicated with the umbilicus with the help through a band or fistula. So how do this Meckel's diverticulum present? This Meckel's diverticulum, as already discussed, it is 2% prevalent and it is 2% symptomatic. That is, majority of the cases it is silent Meckel's diverticulum. Asymptomatic in majority of the cases. It is symptomatic in only 2% cases. So silent Meckel's diverticulum found normally during laparotomy. If you are doing for other surgeries, then you can find silent Meckel's diverticulum like appendicitis or intussusception. If you are doing that surgery, in such cases also you will see silent Meckel's diverticulum, or during laparoscopy or with radioisotope studies for other diseases. So if you find a silent Meckel's diverticulum, how do you proceed? When found in the course of abdominal surgeries, so when you are doing some laparotomy or laparoscopy, if you find a silent Meckel's diverticulum, it is better safely to be left alone. You should not touch the Meckel's diverticulum, provided it has wide mouth and is not thickened. But if there is doubt that it is narrow mouth and it is thickened, or the base is indurated and it is inflamed, in such cases it's better to go for resection. Mostly if you find a silent Meckel's diverticulum and if it is well wide mouth and it's not showing any features of inflammation, then it's better to left alone. 2% of Meckel's diverticulum is symptomatic. Of this 2%, 50% of these symptomatic patients are below the 2 years of age, and male ratio is 2%. See, this anomaly is also common in males only. In some of the books it is wrongly given that is common in females, but it's common in males only. And mostly the age of presentation is less than 2 years. So this is about silent Meckel's diverticulum. How do clinically or symptomatic Meckel's diverticulum present? Why do the Meckel's diverticulum will show the symptoms? It shows symptoms because of presence of heterotopic mucosa. The heterotopic mucosa is nothing but it's not the normal mucosa. It is an abnormal mucosa is present in the Merkel's diverticulum that predisposes to the development of complication. In 20% of cases, this heterotopic epithelium is present or mucosal epithelium is present, of which heterotopic epithelium, gastric epithelium is common. That is 50% of the cases you will see gastric epithelium, and the others are like colonic epithelium and the pancreatic epithelium. This because of this abnormal epithelium, the symptoms will be. So what are the complications or what are the symptoms of Meckel's diverticulum? One is hemorrhage, the other one is chronic ulceration, intestinal obstruction, diverticulitis, perforation, intussusception, litus hernia. So coming to the pathophysiology of hemorrhage, because of this gastric ectopic gastric mucosa, there will be painless rectal bleeding or maroon colored hemorrhage that is caused due to ectopic gastric or pancreatic mucosa. Secretion of this gastric acid or alkaline pancreatic juice from this ectopic mucosa leads to ulceration and perforation and bleeding. The other complication is chronic ulceration. It is mostly this ulceration, the pain will be found along the umbilicus because Meckel's diverticulum is midgut origin. The other complication is intestinal obstruction. As we discussed before, that Meckel's diverticulum can be present with a band communicating with the Meckel's diverticulum, the umbilicus. So it may present with volvulus or direct because of this band. See, in this picture, you will be able to appreciate the volvulus. The other important feature is diverticulitis, that is obstruction. Because of this inflammation of the Meckel's diverticulum, it causes diverticulitis, and this diverticulitis will mimic as acute appendicitis. So when you are operating for an suspected appendicitis and if you are seeing a normal appendix, then it is always better to check for Meckel's diverticulum, that is 2 feet from the ileocecal junction. Meckel's diverticulum should be looked for by examining small bone, particularly if there is free fluid or pus. Sometimes this Meckel's diverticulum can be presented as perforation. This mimics perforated duodenal ulcer. Sometimes like intussusception, as we had discussed before, Meckel's diverticulum is also forms a lead point for ileoileal or ileocolic intussusception. See, this is the rare one, that is Leiter's hernia, presence of Leiter's hernia, that is presence of Meckel's diverticulum in hernial sac as a content. This is observed in inguinal or femoral hernia. See, if the Meckel's diverticulum is forming as the content, then it is Leiter's hernia. Sometimes carcinoid or cyst can also occur in Meckel's diverticulum. This is a picture showing the Leiter's hernia. If Meckel's diverticulum is the content in the hernial sac. See, Meckel's diverticulum is frequently suspected. We will be seeing suspecting in most of the cases, but often sought and rarely it is found. How do you diagnose? The treatment, the investigation of choice is like technetium radioisotope scan, which give 90 to 95% accuracy, and 90% of heterotopic gastric mucosa can be identified in Meckel's diverticulum. So this is the one showing the Meckel's diverticulum in radioisotope studies. And this isotope studies also can detect minimal bleeding. And X-rays investigations also to know the complications like obstructions and perforation, small bowel enema, enterocolitis are also, these are also other investigative modalities. Diagnostic laparoscopy also helps when there is a doubt or in case of suspected Meckel's. Coming to the treatment, if it is an asymptomatic, it can be left alone when identified. Surgery is to be done when it is narrow based, lengthy diverticulum, if there is adhesion or bands, or symptomatic patients with complications or with presence of complication, and children below 2 years of age. See, broad based Meckel's diverticulum, it should not be amputated, it should be excised. If you amputated, then there's a chance of stricture and leaving behind the heterotopic epithelium. So the surgery is like Meckel's diverticulectomy. Excise the diverticulum either by resecting it and suturing the defect at its base or with the help of linear stapler cutter. If the base is indurated, in such cases, you will go for resection anastomosis. So this is the picture. There are two surgeries. One is Meckel's diverticulectomy, that is removing the Meckel's diverticulum, excising the Meckel's diverticulum, resection and suturing. If it is indurated, then you will do resection anastomosis. In case of indurated, then you have to plan for alternate procedures, that is resection anastomosis. So in case of Meckel's diverticulum, you have to remember this rule of 2, that it is common in 2% of general population and it is 2% symptomatic, and it is 2:1 ratio in males and female, like it is 2 feet from the distance from the ileocecal wall, and 50% of symptomatic cases are under 2 years, and about it is 2 inches long. In adult patient is symptomatic in only about 2%. So this is about the Meckel's diverticulum, which is the most common anomaly of the small intestine, mostly asymptomatic. And the investigations like radioisotope and surgery, depending upon if it is silent, we have to leave, and if it is showing any symptoms like complications, then you have to go for diverticulectomy or resection anastomosis. This ends. Any doubts? If you have any doubts, you can ask. Kumar, అయిపోయింది. See, one of the doubt is like why pneumatic and hydrostatic reduction are contraindicated in peritonitis and profound shock. See, this pneumatic and hydrostatic reduction, this you have to be done in patients with early presentation, because once the patient is already in peritonitis, if you are giving barium enema or the air from below, it will leads to more peritonitis, that is generalized peritonitis. And the other question is, does peristalsis affects into susception? I didn't get you. Does peristalsis affect? See, in the normal peristalsis, if the bowel is having no lead points, then the peristalsis will be normal. But in case of pathological lead points, like if there is any pathological polyp, in that case there will be the peristalsis will be altered. In such cases, retrograde peristalsis, there is a chance of causing this into susception. So any more? So again, I'm clearing that pneumatic and hydrostatic reduction is contraindicated in peritonitis, because this will add up of more peritonitis, or they may cause more trauma to the patient when the patient is in shock. And peristalsis, if it is in abnormal direction or if it is in retrograde direction, it will definitely have an issue with the pathology of into susception. Right. Thank you.